Funding for the Hinckley Report is made possible in part by the George S. and Dolores Doré Eccles Foundation and the Cleone Peterson Eccles Endowment Fund.
Tonight on the Hinckley Report. As the year draws to a close, leaders in Washington are still hard at work. What major changes will we see in the final weeks? Will they avoid a government shutdown? And how are Utah's lawmakers involved? In Utah, lawmakers prepare for the year ahead. What candidates are making big announcements? Which issues are becoming headlines? And how are Utahns weighing in?
Good evening and welcome to the Hinckley Report. I'm Jason Perry, director of the Hinckley Institute of Politics. Covering the week, we have Ben Winslow, political reporter with Fox 13 News. Nicole Nixon, political reporter with KUER, and Glen Mills, anchor and political reporter with ABC4 News. So glad to be with you all today. We're going to jump in because there's a lot of stuff happening in politics. We'll start with you, Ben. Okay, so we're all watching what's happening in Washington, D.C. this week, an impending government shutdown.
Tick-tock.
The clock is literally ticking right now. Explain to us what's happening.
Well, right now there's obviously a big dispute. The government, there has been a partial funding. There has been some money given, but not without the border wall. The House voted, obviously, to secure that. The president wants that. He wants it because it's a key campaign promise that he made. And we're going to see if the Senate's going to give it to him. The House acquiesced along largely a party line vote, and now they've sent it back to the Senate. The president this morning is meeting with Senate Republicans to make the pitch to see if they can find some kind of common ground, but we're going to see if ultimately he can get it.
Yeah. Go ahead.
This is like the ultimate game of chicken just before Christmas, with the American people as the potential losers in this, especially those who work for the federal government. That's what we saw last time the government shut down, is those workers who are living paycheck to paycheck, all of a sudden that paycheck stops coming in, and they're the ones that ultimately lose from this.
Nicole, how big of a deal is this wall? Paint a picture for us, because this seems to be the dividing line.
Right, and this is the issue, I think, that Trump campaigned on and that he promised during the campaign. Of course, while he was campaigning, he said Mexico is going to pay for it, and now that's the fight, is this $5 billion that Democrats really don't want to give, and it's going to be exponentially harder for him to get it in January when Democrats take over the House. So he really wants to get this now.
But we're going to be right back at this, I think, again in February, because this only funds for a certain amount of time.
That's true. That is true. And so we have this conversation going forward. But I'm curious about this point that Nicole just made. So there were two campaign promises. One is the wall, and I guess the other part was, and we're not paying for it. Help us understand.
Guess what? We're paying for it. That's appears to be the case, because what you're seeing is this funding, unless that GoFundMe account that's been going on in Florida suddenly takes off, it appears that the U.S. government is going to be paying for this, and that's taxpayers.
Glenn, where are our delegation?
Well, our delegation, the House voted on the bill last night. All three, Mia Love was not there, but all three voted in favor of it. And I actually had a chance to talk with Representative Stewart on the phone last night right before the vote, and Representative Curtis was right there with him. And they were adamant that this promise that the president made, the $5 billion border security, be in this bill. And they were trying to broker a deal that they thought they'd be able to get more Democrats on with about $8 billion in disaster relief funding. They thought potentially they could get the California Democrats on board with that part of the bill. However, you take a look at the vote today, and as Ben pointed out, it was pretty much party line. Only Republicans voting no, no Democrats voting yes. So even as that goes into the Senate, we aren't expecting them to be on board with that bill anyway, but clearly the Democrats in the House did not bite on that, so why would the Democrats in the Senate?
Nicole, I'm curious about some of the ramifications, because, you know, you get a bill, and they have to talk about what the cost might be. I'm curious about a statement from President Trump. He said, I'm shut down this, and I will take the blame. I'm kind of curious how you're seeing that out there. Is he going to get the blame if this goes, or who will ultimately?
I mean, he said he would shoulder the blame. What's interesting is at the beginning of the week, it looked like he would sign this bill that the Senate initially passed, and then you had Ann Coulter going on Fox News and saying he is a liar. He promised a wall, and now he's giving in, and we're not going to get a wall. And he changed his mind almost immediately and said, I don't want to have this fight in February with the Democrats. I want to have it now. And he's willing to shut down the government over it. I mean, he said that. He said he would take the blame. So I guess we'll see if he keeps that promise, too.
Yeah. Ben, we've been through this fairly recently, and as a state, we had some impacts the last time. We understand Department of Interior is going to keep the parks open, but no essential services, no visitor center. How does a closure like this, apart from that, really impact our state?
In a number of ways. I mean, tourism is a huge factor here, and you know, the Mighty Five is a big draw to people. We are entering sort of a little bit of a slow time. So if you have your worst case scenario and the government shuts down, it may not be as bad, but you're still going to have people who are coming through here, and yes, that is going to impact potentially local economies, especially the economies around these parks that depend largely on tourism dollars. Obviously, the state's going to try to also make a push of, hey, while you're here, visit our wonderful, state parks that we have. We have Dead Horse Point, we have Goblin Valley, all of these other areas. Check these out. They're open.
The state kept the national parks open 5 years ago when the government shut down in 2013, and they gave up about $1 million, and they tried to get reimbursed for that, and it ultimately it never came from the federal government. So we may lose a little more money this time too.
Just again, a point I already made, but back in 2013, the people that really were hurt by this were the federal employees whose paychecks stopped coming, who were living paycheck by paycheck. All of a sudden they're wondering, how do I make my house payment? How do I pay for childcare? They really lost in that last shutdown.
Okay, let's talk about a win for Senator Lee in his mind this week. Glenn, let's go with you, because you had a very interesting story this week where you interviewed a former U.S. Attorney, Brett Tolman, on this criminal justice reform. What did it do, and why is our delegation so interested in it? Okay,
so remember back when we were growing up in the 80s and 70s and whatnot? Some of us.
Quiet, you.
Okay, so back then, what was the big pitch from our political office seekers? I will be tough on crime. That's where all these mandatory minimums, all these harsh federal sentences came from, and people were getting elected on that, even up in through the 90s. Now we're starting to see the impact of that. Federal prisons bursting at the seams, people being charged like Weldon Angelos, one of the people that Senator Lee here in Utah really shined the spotlight on over this, being sentenced to 55 years for what in the long term, in the long run, was a pretty minimal infraction. I think he got caught selling marijuana, and he did it like 3 times. 55 years for that. Brett Tolman talked about a 23-year-old who was mandatorily sentenced to 77 years in federal prison. So now we're starting to take a look at this, and we even saw this trickle down locally in the local sheriff's office. Now, instead of being tough on crime, we're starting to hear we need to be smart on crime. So this reform does away or gives judges more discretion when it comes to these sentences. If they see someone that they think, may be able to rehabilitate themselves, be a contributing member of society, be a father to their children, they have that discretion now to not go with these mandatory minimum sentences. Also, a huge part of this bill is to invest in rehabilitation programs and get them a foundation while they're in prison so that they can go on and be successful in life after.
Nicole, one of the interesting things about this bill is this is one where we saw true bipartisan support. Why did this issue capture both sides of the aisle? And maybe a little comment about why Jared Kushner was so involved in this one.
Well, Jared Kushner has a little experience with this because his own father was sentenced to some months in federal prison. So this was an absolute spectrum of political opinions. You saw progressive Democrats, you saw Kim Kardashian go to the White House to make a pitch for this, Jared Kushner, Republicans like Mike Lee. I think the only people who weren't happy with this in the end were law enforcement and sheriff's agencies. And it's an issue that, like you said, Brett Tolman has been working on for many, many years, I think 8 years, pushing and pushing. And Mitch McConnell, of course, over the past few months didn't want to take it up. And it took a lot of lobbying on the part of Jared Kushner, Mike Lee, the President Trump to get it through. But it passed with support on both sides of the aisle.
One of the things I thought was really interesting about that is that the crew that Mike Lee is usually in with on everything he stands for was against him on this one. The far right conservative branch of the Senate, you know, Cotton and Kennedy, calling it misguided and dangerous. The "we need to still be tough on crime" crew worked against Senator Lee. However, in the end, it was a landslide victory in the Senate.
If we can take just a minute on what happened here with Senator Mike Lee, because he's had a lot of time.
He's had an interesting week, hasn't he?
Yeah, so there's one big one, a couple other ones.
He got this one, and then there's been a couple of others. There's been the public lands bill that he was basically been accused of blocking as part of some of the machinations of Washington that's angered some in rural Utah who have wanted that to pass. Then there's the EEOC issue where he's holding up the nominee, a Trump re-nominee, because of her views on LGBTQ rights and his views on religious freedom and traditional marriage. And then there's, isn't there one more, I think?
He, just a few weeks ago, also single-handedly blocked the resolution to support the Mueller probe, the special counsel.
So he's had certainly an interesting week in Washington, or at least an interesting couple of weeks.
Yeah.
Is this him being the senior senator from the state, or is this just like a rise?
You can't help but wonder if this is a sign of things to come. This is a man who often largely was in Senator Hatch's shadow. He may be coming into his own now. He has his own visions. He certainly, of course, has always been his own man, but, you know, this may be, these are the priorities that I have, these are the views that I have, and I'm now the senior senator.
Seems strange, though, if as a senior senator, it seems like you would want to work with your side a little more to get these things through.
Let's take up this issue that you just brought, the shadow of Orrin Hatch. Nicole, can we start with you? You did some great reporting on Orrin Hatch. He gave his farewell speech this last week in the Senate. He's coming back to the state. Let's talk about the legacy for just a moment. And some of your reporting, what do you think one of his legacies is?
There are a lot, and I've noticed this over the past few weeks. He's picked about 7 or 8 pieces of legislation that he's called his favorite pieces of legislation. But I think that if you're in the Senate for 42 years, 7 terms, maybe you do get 7 favorites.
Okay, we'll give him that. So.
there's
out of the 800 plus.
Yeah, exactly. There's the things, of course, he will be remembered for, like CHIP, children's health insurance, a lot of work he did on health care legislation, bipartisan bills with Democrats through the years, things like his work on the Americans with Disabilities Act. In more recent years, he's been an ally for LGBT and has always been an ally for religious liberty. So he had the chance to reflect on that in his farewell speech last week. He lamented the state of the Senate at this point and how it seems to have moved away from the bipartisanship that he has championed throughout his career, and said that the Senate may very well be in crisis.
Glenn, that was interesting because he had a call for civility in his farewell speech. Now, does that coincide with this long history? Is this, you know, when someone looks at 42 years of the Senate, is that where you think he would likely end on that conversation?
He certainly has seen the Senate evolve from one body to a completely different body. However, a lot of people pointed to his speech and thought it was somewhat hypocritical in ways, in that, you know, recently we've heard him say words about Democrats that I can't repeat on this television program. The Merrick Garland nomination, he was right in the mix of blocking President Obama's nomination to the Supreme Court, which, by the way, he knew well the pendulum always swings and that could come back to bite Republicans at another time. But there's no doubt you cannot look at his career and see that he was willing to cross party lines to get things done. He's still doing it the very last days. Just this week, he teamed up with Senator Schumer on a sports betting bill. You would think those two would never come together and see eye to eye. But he's known definitely for crossing the line. Of course, his friendship with the late Ted Kennedy. He worked on huge landmark legislation with him. And when I went to D.C. to cover his last days a couple months ago, there's this feeling among Democrats. I talked with Senator Blumenthal from Connecticut, that even though they see things so differently politically, there's still a mutual respect between Democratic lawmakers and Senator Hatch. And would say that's why we see them willing to work with him on legislation.
Ben, one of the things people have been talking about with the departure of Senator Orrin Hatch is whether or not Mitt Romney could be the person that reaches across the aisle and fills that void. I mean, you're interviewing everyone. Is that the feeling that's going to happen?
I think everybody wants to wait and see, and what you get with Mitt Romney. I mean, this is a man who will enter Washington with outsized influence. The man ran for president of the United States, and he has that cachet that he immediately goes into office with. But he is still a freshman senator, and so and really in Utah, he's of course our junior senator, but he's new to that in terms of that arena of government. Yes, he was governor, but he ran for president. He's got all of this impressive resume. It's going to be interesting to see what he does with it. If he asserts himself and starts finding himself in more leadership type roles, or if he steps back and just kind of learns and watches what happens. One of the areas where he will get to weigh in, Nicole, let's talk about some departures. Department of the Interior is about to have a major change this year with Secretary Hinckley leaving the post. And the reason I want to talk about this is first the impact on the state from the Department of the Interior, but also we have a couple of Utahns on the list as potential replacements.
Right.
Tell us who they are.
Yeah, Representative Rob Bishop and Attorney General Sean Reyes, which I think was a bit of a surprise to a few of us. He doesn't have much experience with public lands, with interior things. Of course, he's been fighting a lot of them in court. And then as well, some other Western figures, Raul Labrador from Idaho, a few other people from Western states. I think I'm not sure what to watch for there. Ryan Zinke was really effective in implementing the Trump agenda on public lands and in the Interior Department. I'm not sure exactly what Trump is looking for as a replacement to fill those shoes. Maybe just somebody with less ethics violation investigations.
Yeah, there's a lot of pressure, though, to appoint someone from the West who understands the uniquely Western issues. So it wouldn't surprise me to see any of these people. Rob Bishop, obviously having chaired the Natural Resources Committee, being a clear front runner for this type of position, especially since he is on his last term. You know, that's not out of the realm of possibility. And now in the minority.
Yeah, absolutely right.
I'll go ahead and go out on a limb and say it will not be Sean Reyes. It just doesn't make a lot of sense. He tends to pop up every time there's an opening for the Trump administration, and some in the past have made more sense along his experience and his line of responsibility, but this particular post just doesn't make a lot of sense for a Sean Reyes. Rob Bishop, as you point out, hits a lot of the criteria that you would think the president would go for, and we're probably going to see someone along the line of thinking is what we saw with Zinke.
Okay. Glenn, will you pick up a thread that Ben brought up here about, maybe someone from the West understands the Western issues. One interesting idea that seems to be catching hold is the idea of even moving the Bureau of Land Management, maybe even to the state of Utah. Why is that kind of on the agenda now, and how likely is it?
Well, Zinke wanted to do that. The governor wants it to happen. A lot of local officials want that to happen. The reasoning is because that department impacts the West more than any other part of the country. So to them, it makes sense to be in the backyard where you're working and to understand those issues. That could be a hit with Zinke leaving potentially, because we know he was moving in that direction. Whether or not the next one will, we'll have to wait and see. But I've been told that of the candidates that are being considered, it's probably narrowed down to 2 or 3 at this time. Maybe we'll see an announcement early next week. But those that support Zinke are saying Utahns that support Zinke are going to be happy with the next selection.
Okay. Can we get into some fun speculation? Because this is the time of year we start thinking about who's going to run for offices. Ben, you're always
It's the most wonderful time of the year, isn't it?
And we're going to start talking 2020 already.
So,
right?
so we're about to do it. Here it comes, Ben. All right. So right now we have coming up in the second week of January the first fundraiser for governor. All right, with Spencer Cox.
Because the governor doesn't throw a party for just anyone.
Oh, please explain.
Obviously, it appears that Spencer Cox is leaning very heavily toward running because the governor is hosting a fundraiser luncheon in the middle of January, ahead of the legislative session for Spencer Cox, and it is soliciting contributions. The Lieutenant Governor's office says that this is to feel out the possibility of whether there is support, to gauge support. So this is kind of the debutante ball, as it were, and to see if he has that kind of support to mount a full-on bid.
Nicole, it's pretty significant, as Ben just said. The governor is convening. Spencer Cox is the headliner, though. All right, so what's this message to other contenders out there?
Well, it might be a little bit of a territory stakeout. Everyone knows that Spencer Cox is very popular, moderate Republican, just like Herbert, and they've been on the same ticket a couple years now, right? A couple elections.
That's right.
So I think, and we've seen some polling on this, right, that shows people that are interested in running for governor, including Jason Chaffetz, Greg Hughes, some other, Rob Bishop,
Sean Reyes,
Republican names, and I think surprising to some, but maybe not surprising to others, Jason Chaffetz has been generally the leader of those polls.
But those are name recognition
exactly,
polls. Right? Exactly.
At this point, Jason Chaffetz is the highest profile of these possible gubernatorial contenders. I think, obviously, this is a fundraiser. What is it, $2,000 a plate? Money will help.
It helps raise the name ID. Go ahead,
And
Glenn.
let's not make any mistake, these campaigns have been going on for a while, unofficially. Clearly, people are jockeying to get their name out there to run for governor. I think those names that you just mentioned that we've been polling, along with Greg Miller, are probably all in. But there's also, I think, going to be other people that get in that we're not talking about right now that could come in and shake things up a bit.
One thing that Nicole mentioned, which is true in all the polling, it is name ID, but the unknowns, the people who don't know, is about 36% in the last poll. So
plenty to sway it any way for any of the other candidates.
Yeah, that's right. One of the things that some of us are watching is this ranked choice voting option. We have at least 3 municipalities, which is the next election.
Maybe 4. We're getting closer.
Talk about how this might work and the logistical issues.
Yeah. So we have Salem, Lehigh, West Jordan have all said so far they're interested. A couple of other cities are flirting with the idea, but they have until the end of next week to declare whether they want to. And this could shake up how voting works. And it's an education period for voters, but they're doing it with the municipals because there's less turnout. There's a little more chance to experiment with this. This is Representative Rebecca Chavez-Houck's legacy, as it were, on one of her many, dealing with voter issues. But this would allow you to go basically on the ballot hot or not, first to worst. You, instead of having the 2 candidates or having a primary, you eliminate that and you rank them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And even if you're, say, 5th place on somebody's ballot, you may be 2nd on somebody else's, there's a chance for you to float up to the top and still capture the office. It's going to be interesting to see if this goes forward, if municipalities can implement this, if county clerks are willing to implement this, and see what happens. But it's been done in other states, other cities, other countries. Australia does it nationally. This could be really interesting as far as how governance gets done. One of the advantages people say is that you can, it requires no longer pandering to a base. You have to build a broader range of support. You're no longer, it eliminates more nasty campaigning. But one of the downsides that critics say is that it leads to coalition government.
It's such an interesting thing to watch what happens when a candidate is running for number 2.
Yeah, yeah, it could definitely change the rhetoric out on the campaign field. A couple of important notes to add to what Ben was saying is they have to declare by next week, but the Lieutenant Governor's office is going to give them some leeway to back out even after they declare. So if they're getting into February, into March, and they're thinking, oh boy, we're not ready for this, they'll still have the option to back out, I believe, by May. Is that deadline.
That's right. Okay, let's talk about a couple of these other interesting local races that are coming up. So we still need to replace Ben McAdams as the Salt Lake County mayor. Nicole, who do we know is in? And let's talk about this process.
There are 3 names we know who are in. There's Jenny Wilson, who famously ran against Mitt Romney for Senate, Shireen Gorbani, who ran for Congress against Chris Stewart, and Arlen Bradshaw, who is on the county council already with Jenny Wilson. I think well, first let's explain how this works. So Ben McAdams officially resigns on January 2nd. the day before he's sworn into Congress. And then the Salt Lake Democratic Party has 1 month to pick his replacement, basically. And those delegates, I'm told, will have a special election in late January or early February to pick that nominee, and then they'll send that name to the county council, who will swear that person in. I think what's worth pointing out is that I think all three of these candidates are a little further left than Ben McAdams is. He joined the Blue Dog Democrat caucus this week. He's been a famous reach across the aisle with Republicans around the state and county. But we'll see. I think all three of those are strong candidates. Jenny Wilson may be front runner, but it's the Democratic delegates who get a pick.
So Ben, it is a little more left than Ben McAdams. Is that what Salt Lake County is looking for, you think?
Well, we've seen certainly a shift in demographics in Salt Lake County. As you have also pointed out, Salt Lake County asserted itself in the last election on a number of issues. We'll see. Remember, when a lot of these people came into party leadership, and we are catering to the committee members of the Salt Lake County Democratic Party, a lot of them were Bernie-crats. They were supporters of that, so they may be more progressive leaning as well. And all three of these people are very good at campaigning, and they are catering for that, but they also have to commit to run for the next election cycle as a mayor in a general election. So you can only go maybe so far left before you have to moderate to the West Jordan, Harriman, Riverton base that's a little bit more conservative.
Okay, very good.
Just one point I would make, Ben McAdams is still the most electable Democrat in Salt Lake County, even with the shift. The Bernie-crats and others still like Ben. So just to address that. But if you take a look at the campaigns that Jenny Wilson and Shreen Gorbani ran, they were clearly setting themselves up for something in the future. On election night, the thought immediately went to Jenny Wilson for county mayor. So you take a look at the campaigns they ran, and they knew they were in an uphill battle, not likely to win, but they set themselves up for other possibilities down the road. And now we're seeing that play out.
Nicole thinks Jenny's probably the front runner. Ben?
I would not underestimate Shreen Gorbani. She had a lot of support. She outperformed in her district as well.
Why is that, do you think?
She was popular. She managed to get a lot of support for a very conservative-leaning district. So that could translate. Arlen Bradshaw as well.
Yeah, and she worked hard. She knocked a lot of doors and met with people that are going to be making this decision.
Okay, thank you. That's have to be last comment. Thank you for your insights. That's it for the Hinckley Report. For more on this week's issues, please visit us online at kued.org/Hinckley Report. I'm Jason Perry. Thank you and good night.